We're going to begin our meditation by taking 3 deep breaths. 1 breath to relax the body. 1 breath to relax the mind. And the last breath you take in and follow it down into your heart space and be at rest with the Spirit within you. We breathe in the breath of God that makes all life holy. We breathe in and out, and we experience the life essence of the divine that indwells all things, including my life, including your life. The essence and energy that is divine is also the same essence and energy that is the I am. Today, feel your physical body. Feel how you are supported in your chair. Notice the way the breath moves in and out of your body. Right now, we know that the body organs, its functions, its systems, its cells, and everything within the body temple is rejuvenated. And it follows the divine pattern of joy, wholeness, harmony, and complete perfection. We know that God is the source of all that is. God is the source of all the energy you will ever need. You can call on Divine Source to fill your body with energy. That energy will live within our bodies like a trumpet, ready to sound off its beautiful notes when needed and as much as needed. All we need to do is ask and trust Divine Source to allow the energy to flow in us and through us. So in the silence, we feel the flow of divine energy. Feel God's abundant energy filling you up. Feel God's abundant love filling you up. Feel God's abundant joy filling you up. Feel and be grateful. Amen. Okay, so in my last talk, it was not easy being green. And I made some references to ego. And later, several folks asked me questions about the statements I made about ego. So there will be an adult class in January on the topic of ego and metaphysical understanding. Randy Wheaton, who participates in A Course of Miracles study group, will lead that class. So this talk is more of a basic introduction into the subject of how our ego can interfere with our spiritual unfoldment. So first, I want to throw around some psychological terms so we can all be on the same page. It might be a year or two since you've been to college, so you might have to get a little refresher course here. These terms were coined by Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung. Bear in mind that Freud's theories did not always pan out, and with more modern research methods, some of his theories have been proven to be incorrect. But he did start the conversation about what goes on inside our heads. And according to Freud, our psychological makeup has three basic components: the id, the ego, and the superego. Jung looked harder at the superego and added more information, calling it the unconscious. The id is all impulse and reaction. It reminds us of our hindbrain that knows the three F's: fight, flight, or reproduction. And that's a reaction we have to anything new. The id is all about demand to meet an immediate need. The id strives for immediate satisfaction and pleasure. The opposite end of things resides the superego. The superego develops over time, and it includes the ideas we gain from family, society, school, and church. The superego generates an internal framework of moral standards. This includes what we believe is right or wrong, acceptable and unacceptable behavior, and guidelines for making judgments. Our superego forms all of our unconscious biases. This knowledge is hidden or part of our unconscious mind, but very influential in our choices, thoughts, and decision making. So let me give you an example of an unconscious bias I had from my own life. I was teaching college at Long Beach City College in California, and in the first week or so of a semester, I got an email from a student that said, "I won't be in class on Tuesday because I have to meet with my parole officer." So I looked back at the name. It could have been a girl name, it could have been a boy name, I don't know what kind of name it was, but I didn't know my students very well. So I had no idea who this could be. I looked back on my roster and I picked out 4 students who could possibly be the author of the email. All 4 students were male, all 4 students were abnormally tall, and all 4 students had tattoos. So imagine my surprise when a young woman about as big as a minute bounces up to me and says, "So I wanted to get the notes from Tuesday because, I was meeting with my parole officer." In my mind, my mouth is hanging open. And I'm also saying to myself, what is the matter with me? Why did I think it would be a man? What do I have against tall people? And where did I get the bias that tattoos equal criminal behavior? Those assumptions all came out of my subconscious mind. And when they attacked me like that, it was a wake-up call to start observing and examining my own bias reactions. Carl Jung was a student of Freud's, and he added to these formative personal ideas universal and primordial memories called the collective unconscious. He believed the collective unconscious was hardwired into our brains, part of our DNA. It's part of the mind containing the memories and impulses which are common to all humankind as a whole. This includes archetypes or universal images and ideas, as well as the idea of shadow aspects of our personality. In New Thought, teachers called this accumulated wisdom and knowledge that is unknown to us in our subconscious and the superego and the collective unconscious, and they decided to call it accumulated race consciousness. And the word race here refers to the human race. As these thoughts are held in our unconscious mind, they are unexamined and, for the most part, unquestioned. Now, acting between the id and the superego is the ego. And the ego's job is to take the impulse reaction from the id, our base selves, and develop norms and expectations from the superego to create our reactions, our thoughts, and our actions. The ego must justify those behaviors and thoughts. It is the job of the ego to meet the needs of the id in a way that is acceptable, reasonable, and in line with the superego. Now, it's important to realize that these components are not separate entities. clearly defined boundaries, nothing like that. It's just how it all works together in our mind to interpret the world around us. Based on this idea of ego, I want to examine two of the jobs of the ego. It assists us to live within society, and one of its functions is to perform the job of justifier. This is part of unified theory that the ego is a mental organ that makes up part of the mind. Self-justification means we have the ability to be self-reflective. This self-reflective awareness allows us to give account of our actions. Most of our justifications are embedded with our superconscious and generally taken for granted. Often when acting or reacting, we can't necessarily identify the specific notion that informed that action, thought, or feeling. We just know that what we're doing is right. Anyone can justify her actions and choices in her own mind based on the individual criteria of the superego, those norms, those upbringings, those expectations. But sometimes her self-justification comes up against another person's perfectly reasonable, socially acceptable action or thought. That means that outside of you and your beliefs, there exists other human beings with their own set of norms, upbringing, expectations, and history. That's where the action or statement we have justified as acceptable and good comes into conflict with someone else's different interpretation of what is acceptable and good. As a teacher, I'd hear my colleagues complain that a student had no common sense. But common sense is just shared cultural expectation. When we don't share the same cultural background, there's no groundwork for common expectations. Polite behavior, manners, and even expected eye contact differ from culture to culture. In Long Beach, there is the greatest number of Cambodian people living anywhere outside of Cambodia. And the Cambodian culture, along with the Vietnamese culture, which is very prominent, and the South Pacific culture in the area, they're all different. And our students were all very different in their expectations. So we had to throw out the idea of common sense. So let's say we come into conflict with someone. Assume every person has the ability to analyze the situation. Upon reflection, each person can explain or justify why what he did or she did was good, right, correct, and of course, the only way to do it or think about it. However, that is not quite accurate. At least that's not all there is. Our minds also have the power in reflection to perceive multiple points of view. Our mind can even perceive the other person with whom we're having a conflict's point of view. At that moment, some of our own justifications may not hold up. Suddenly we can see that what we did or thought really wasn't the highest and best for all people in the given situation. Often when this happens, apologies ensue with a great deal of, looking at it from your perspective, I can see how you might think or feel, right? And we suddenly have to start backtracking. However, this also causes a personal disequilibrium within the mind. Now the ego has to add or adjust new information to the justification system. We all know from experience that we can tie ourselves into knots, trying to justify what we did and why we did it and why we are not to blame for any negative outcome. This is our ego, interpreting the world around us and reasoning and defending the point of view developed from the superego. So one job of the ego is to self-justify thoughts, reactions, and actions in a way that makes sense to the unconscious and often unknown interior worldview that we've developed. Another job of the ego is to protect your sense of self, which has been developed, again, from content and conditioning in your mind. The ego will protect the sense of self by keeping all things status quo. This means keeping your life going in its current trajectory, even if you are unhappy, uncomfortable, or in pain. The ego strives to keep things exactly as they are now. This means that the act of the ego behaves in a slippery and sinister way. If you're trying to solve a personal problem or desire a change in your life, your ego steps in to help you look for possible solutions. It will continue to help you look and seek and explore and research and ask opinions and gather options and make comparisons, and in all ways keep your mind busy so that you never make any change or discover any new opinion that disrupts your status quo. The ego loves to help identify through labels, stories, problems, and reactions without any intention of solving the problem, letting go of the story, and examining and finding out if the label is true or not. This is why it is often said the job of the ego is to seek but not find. Your ego may send you off in several directions, learning about new and interesting things that will not address the problem at hand and turn out to be a time-absorbing detour. You may enjoy the view along the way, but it does not disrupt the status quo. The ego keeps your mind busy and at the same time keeps you from actually taking any new action. Your ego is protecting your carefully constructed mental identity by keeping everything in line, justified, and the same. Your ego protects you and keeps the status quo using your own thoughts and feelings, which are based in past stories that your mind keeps active and circulating. We've all heard that the mind thinks between 60,000 and 80,000 thoughts per day, and 90% of those thoughts are just repeats from the day before. The stories keep circulating. Your mind keeps up continual self-talk that keeps you in your own very carefully constructed box, your own consistent and justified status quo. The ego function does not allow for much spiritual growth. If your ego is using repeated thoughts, feelings, and stories to keep everything the same, how does one ever make a change, incorporate a new thought, or discover a surprising spiritual reality? Well, the two jobs of the ego I've talked about so far, justification and keeping the status quo, are both unconscious activities of your mind. Our minds are conditioned by thousands of years of cultural, societal, genetic, and personal conditioning that have strong momentum and drive the bus of our unconscious awareness. But it all comes to a screeching halt as soon as we wake up and become conscious. So how can we bypass the ego to explore greater spiritual awareness? The only way we can get past the ego is to become conscious. Becoming conscious means being aware of what is happening right in your own mind. In reading an article about overcoming ego, I came across this quote. It may seem like fear, desire, longing, frustration, anger, and so on are caused by external circumstances, events, and people, but are actually mind created. It's all in the mind. We construct our own reality. Here are two keys to enact change and allow for spiritual unfoldment. 1, realize you are not what the voice in your head keeps telling you. Those automatic, repetitive, conditioned, and often negative thoughts that come from your own mind are not real, and they are not the truth of who you are. Number 2, become the observer. Being conscious means being the observer of your own life. And this is not just a step for beginners. It is the ongoing necessity of those striving and seeking spiritual oneness. Being conscious by observing your everyday actions carefully is the start of opening yourself up. First, observe the stories you're telling yourself and others. How often and to how many people do you repeat the same drama story? It could be the past story of how your husband left you or the current story of how you were disrespected by a friend. But it is still a story that your ego is keeping alive to distract you, to keep the status quo and to keep you from the divine truth of who you really are. Second, observe your emotional reactions. Hey, I just shouted at the car in front of me for not using turn signals. Now, what's that all about? Where did that anger come from? Why is it exploding at an inanimate object and a driver who can't hear me? Observe. Third, observe your ego in action as it takes up a mental position and defends it. The next time you feel a compulsive need to be right and the urge to react or argue or resist or interject or control or defend your viewpoint, just drop it and see what happens. My friend Scott travels a lot, and he camps in the BLM land. And sitting around the big campfires with a bunch of strangers, the rhetoric starts, and the arguing, and the postulating. And he waits for someone to take a breath, and he says, hey, do you know where we can get some propane around here? And it just stops everyone dead in their tracks. Like they have to stop that ego-driven thing to be right and to change your mind and to show you how wrong you are to, oh yeah, the store, they start talking about something else. So in this time of our society, when you find yourself needing to be right, the urge to react or argue or resist or interject or control or defend your viewpoint, just drop it and observe what happens next. Fourth, observe your willingness to completely accept whatever is happening in the present moment. Observe if you can accept what is happening in the present moment without your mind, your inner dialogue, adding judgments or labels or commentary. Or better yet, try this experiment. Completely accept whatever arises in the present moment as if it were your choice. Finally, observe pain in your body and affirm that pain is impersonal. Pain is not out to get you or ruin your day. Observe pain as a signal from your physical body to take note. Stop judging and being mad at your physical body for experiencing pain. Pain is not a punishment, a judgment, or a personal fault. Pain just is. Sometimes it is the catalyst that sends you to find healing. Sometimes it increases your empathy for others. Sometimes pain awakens you to the spirit within, or it helps you become a better observer of your own life. So right now, how many people are in pain? It's not personal. When you and I become observers of our own lives, we awaken to the spirit within. We awaken to the opportunity to see beyond our ego definitions of the world and beyond our ego's understanding of who and what we are. As the observer, we can ask questions of our old stories, ask questions of unchecked or limiting beliefs, ask questions of finding those pockets of unforgiveness and areas where we have actually stopped love from happening. As observers, we can take over and drive the bus of our own thoughts, actions, and reactions. But remember, in order to observe, you first have to become conscious. There is more, much more we can do to move beyond ego responses. But for today and in the coming week, be the observer. Step away from justifying your actions and actually begin to question the status quo. And if you want to know more about how to move beyond your usual ego-bound responses, then I guess you're just going to have to attend Randy's class this January. For now, awaken, be conscious, observe your life. So it is. Amen.